Hello, everyone. I'm David Jobin. I'm the president and CEO of Our Fund Foundation, and I am very happy that you are with us tonight. I'm looking around the screen, the Zoom screen, and I see a number of names who are supporters of our fund, and I want to thank you for that. It's meaningful. We are nearing the $21 million mark in assets, and none of that would be possible without you. So for those of you who are on the call who are not as familiar with our fund, let me just tell you a little bit about our organization before we get this evening started. We're an LGBT community foundation. We are here to elevate and support philanthropy directed at LGBT causes and agencies here in South Florida, in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. We've been doing this for 10 years, almost 11. We're the third largest LGBT community foundation in the country, and we grant out between $1.5 million and $2 million a year. The lecture series that you're about to hear is, we started a few years back as a way to honor our Legacy Society members. Those are the individuals in the community who have decided to partner with our fund on their estate plans and wills, so that when they die, the values that they live their lives by can continue. If you have an interest in working with us on your will or estate plan to support LGBT causes and concerns here in South Florida, please give us a call. It's an easy conversation for us to have with you, and you really could benefit our community greatly. I'm going to turn this over to Obed in a moment, but before I do that, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are almost to the moment, a year from the time that Justin Flippin passed away. It was on this day, almost at this hour, last year. Many of you knew Justin. He was the mayor of Wilton Manors. He had incredible promise as a leader of our community. And here at our fund, we were able to start a fund in Justin's name to support a political science major at his alma mater, FAU. We just honored, gave the first scholarship away, and you can find out more information about the recipient on our Facebook page. But it feels good to be able to do something to give back in Justin's memory. I also want to thank George Zuber, who is on the call. George Zuber is really instrumental in helping to put this conversation together tonight. And I'm nothing if I'm not a fundraiser, so I'm just going to say it. I'm making a pitch to all of you to make a gift tonight to one of the two agencies or both of the agencies that are on our panel tonight. If you make a gift of $50 or more, George Zuber will donate a copy of his DVD, Where Justice Ends, which is about the injustices faced by transgender people in the prison system. So all you have to do is notify Obed or me that you made this gift, and we will send this off to you. Thank you, George, for making that possible. I also want to thank Shevrin Jones, who has agreed to be the moderator tonight. Shevrin was elected to the state Senate in November. He's the first openly LGBT person to be elected to our state Senate. And I know it can get frustrating here in the state of Florida when we think of our top 3 elected officials and their anti-LGBT stance. And I will say, I had the pleasure of hearing Shevrin at Scott Bennett's house a year when he was running for office. And I take great comfort in knowing that there are leaders like Shevrin ready to fill those seats. He's really a passionate leader of our community, and I'm so pleased that he's on tonight. And now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Obed Caballero, who really did all the work in putting tonight's presentation together. Take it away, Obed.
Thanks, David. Well, hi, everybody. I want to welcome everyone who is on the call tonight for joining us. So, we decided to do a talk like this because we recognize that this is a topic that's often overlooked, and it includes an underserved part of our community. And since part of our mission is to try and address, where the need is, we recognize that it's an area that isn't really talked about as much. So we brought on Scott and Mark and Shevrin to talk about, so we can help everyone in the community understand and build empathy and hopefully engage in action. So without much further delay, I'll toss it on over to Shevrin and he can introduce our panel.
Thank you so much, Obed. I really appreciate you and appreciate the introduction. Before I get started, I definitely want to pause to tell you, David, thank you for the work that you all do at our fund. And I really appreciate the support that many of you who are on this call that you gave to get me across the finish line here within the legislature to now serve in the state senate. I see Scott, I see Ken and DC on here. I see so many of you who were very helpful to me, and I really appreciate you all. And to show you that having a seat at the table means something, I'll tell you that I had a meeting with the Senate President about 2 weeks ago, and there are a few anti-LGBTQ bills that are coming across the way, especially over in the House. And the Senate President was very candid with me, and he said, as long as I'm the Senate President, he said, I know what I have in my chamber. He said, I respect you. And he said, you will not; those bills will not see the light of day in this chamber as long as I'm here. And so, which I'm very happy about. And that's what my dad always used to say, which is an old saying, that if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. So I'm happy that we have a seat at the table, so we can stop that type of bad legislation. And along with that, today we all should be proud because the U.S. just passed the Equality Act, which is great. Now it's going over into the Senate, and I believe we will have a victory there also. But I think this conversation that we are looking to have today is one that is long overdue, and that's talking about mass incarceration in the LGBTQ community. And I'm so honored to be able to moderate this important panel discussion. As a gay Black man, I mean, I've seen the connection between the over-policing of my community and the ways that racism, homophobia, sexism, and the prison industrial complex have negatively impact our lives. I know that tonight's discussion will help advance our collective consciousness as a whole. I would like to introduce Scott Greenberg, Executive Director of the LGBT Freedom Fund. Scott Greenberg is Executive Director and founder of LGBTQ Freedom Fund. He is co-founder of the Connecticut Bail Fund and formerly a program manager at Transitions Clinic at Yale University, where he studied the intersection of mass incarceration and health. I introduce to you all Scott. Scott, you can just give us about a Sunday school introduction of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for doing this. Thank you to our fund for having me. Sunday school introduction. So I run the LGBTQ Freedom Fund. We, as our primary direct service, pay bail for LGBT individuals who are being held in pretrial detention and also immigration detention. Pretrial detention we do in the state of Florida. We're posting bail in about 27 counties now, which is quite a bit from where we started with the 3 counties of South Florida. And then for immigration bonds, so individuals who are held in immigration detention, we're paying bail in all 50 states. And we've done it regularly in about 15 states, mostly border states. Is that good?
That's good. Listen,
Okay.
I'm sure we're gonna get into more, Scott. Don't worry. Okay. Thank you, Scott. And this person I know very well, good friend of mine, and that's Marq Mitchell, who is the founder of Chainless Change, a recovery community organization that serves those at the intersection of justice involvement and behavioral health conditions. Marq works centers those who have lived experience with the criminal legal system in the struggle for systemic transformation. Marq is a child of formerly incarcerated parents who was also involved in the criminal legal system himself. Marq understands the system firsthand. He is proof that with access to education, training, housing, and employment, formerly incarcerated women and men can not only thrive, but contribute immensely to society. Marq, introduce yourself.
I think that you just did, but thank you. I'm Marq Mitchell. I am the founder and director of Chainless Change. We serve people in Broward and Miami-Dade counties who are impacted by the criminal legal system. In addition to that, I'm also currently a Roddenberry Fellow. Prior to getting involved in doing this work, I contributed to a lot of community service projects that were centered on addressing youth incarceration, as well as helping people transitioning to the community through programs like OIC in South Florida.
Thank you so much for that, Marq. So we're going to get right into it. So I guess, Scott, I'll start with you. Scott, why did you choose this type of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So decade after decade in this country, we've overlooked this country. The LGBT movement has overlooked LGBT people in the criminal legal system. There's not a strong narrative to account for really jaw-dropping disparities that you see between LGBT people and non-LGBT people in the criminal legal system. So for one, LGBT individuals, they're 300% more likely to be incarcerated than non-LGBT individuals. That data comes from a huge probability sample of 100,000 individuals who are currently incarcerated. And that statistic comes from the Department of Justice. So it's as real as it can be, the disparities, but people don't talk about it. Another pretty remarkable statistic, 1 in 2 Black trans women has been incarcerated at some point in their lives. So that's 50%. I think that story is rarely told, and it really needs to be. And the stories that, first, discrimination and stigma, it pushes people into the criminal legal system. So does harmful policing that targets LGBT people. Once in the system, LGBT people are treated a lot more harshly. This manifests as disproportionate rates of solitary confinement. LGBT people are held in solitary confinement a lot more often. Also sexual abuse, which is a huge and rampant problem for the general population, but for LGBT people, they're 10 to 20 times more likely to be sexually abused. So you consider those disparities, and then you consider the fact that, just talking, again, general population, Americans in this country, 1 in 3 has a serious misdemeanor or a felony conviction. That's 33% of Americans in this country. And then LGBT people are 300% more likely. So this isn't a 1 out of every 10,000 people in the LGBT community is impacted. This is a sweep of extraordinary proportion. So, those disproportionate rates that feed people into the system, the mistreatment during incarceration, and then the additional barriers that people face when they're coming out of prison and jail, LGBT individuals, whether it's in parole or probation or in reentry programs that don't have LGBT competency, really creates a landscape that needs to be common knowledge, and it needs to be addressed, but it's really not. And on a sort of more biographical note, I was working at Yale, as you mentioned, and I started Connecticut's First Bail Fund. So when I saw that these LGBT disparities were not being addressed, what I did is I sort of brought those two things together and created the LGBT Freedom Fund to address LGBT criminalization. The idea is we do this work as a direct intervention. It's harm reduction. Yep. We're, curbing the ills of incarceration in the LGBT community. And we're sort of using that compelling intervention to build the platforms where, we get on a panel like this and we educate people about the issues. And hopefully, one day it'll be common knowledge.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, and I think you just brought up a good point about the LGBTQ competency at the reentry. I definitely want to talk more about that in a few minutes. Mark, same question. Why did you choose this work? Just reading through your story in your intro, of family being incarcerated, you being formerly incarcerated. Talk to us about how you have now gotten into this work to help others.
Yeah, sure. It's a bit personal for me. I myself was involved in the criminal legal system. I grew up in systems, whether it was foster care, juvenile detention systems, and then eventually the adult facilities. And because I understand from my experiences how challenging it is for people to survive and to return to the community after having contact with those systems, I decided that I wanted to make this my work. I've noticed, not from just you know, my family, but there's the stats out there, right? 7 million people in our country are on some kind of correctional supervision. So like community control, probation, etc. There is over 2 million people in jails throughout the country. So many folk are impacted by this. But there are not a lot of resources available to help people navigate back into the community. This is especially true for people who have behavioral health conditions, which is the population that we serve. So that's folk that have histories of lived experience with some kind of mental health conditions or substance use. And for people like us, that's about 60% of folk inside of institutions. And while being housed inside of those facilities, nothing's being done to really address the root of the issues that resulted in contact with the criminal legal system in the first place. Furthermore, once returning back to the communities, there are so many policies in place that criminalize many of our experiences like poverty and homelessness and the participation in survival economies such as sex work. And because of this, I think that it is critical for there to be a community established for folk like me to come and feel embraced, to receive support, and to be empowered to go back into society and make meaningful change. And so that's why I decided to do this work.
Oh, wow. So the fact that you just said something, Mark, that was just in an article that I read earlier talking about how we criminalize conditions with no solutions, which is actually a real thing that we deal with in our criminal justice system. And so often they make mention of criminal justice reform, but never talk about the root cause of why individuals, as you said, are in the position that they're in already. So I appreciate that. And this question goes to both of you. I think we want to talk through this. What do you all think are the major issues with contact with the criminal legal system as it relates to LGBTQ people? Is it poverty? Is it homelessness? Is it substance abuse, criminalization of sex work, or over policing? Either one of you can start.
Yeah, I think that it's all of those things. All of those things contribute to people coming into contact with the criminal legal system. I refer to it as the criminal legal system because it's so full of injustices. It's not really centered on justice for people who are accused of crime. And I believe that poverty and homelessness, mental health conditions, all of those things make people more likely to come into contact with the system. I mean, it's true, the data's there. It's, like I said, there's 67% of folk inside that have these mental health conditions, and they remain untreated once people are inside of the custody of corrections facilities. And so I think that if we want to do something to reduce the jail population and the rate of incarceration in our country, we first have to look at the behaviors that are being criminalized. And we have to also look at what we're doing to ensure that there are alternatives before incarceration. What are we doing to address mental health conditions? Are we instead housing people for having an addiction? Are we housing them inside of institutions, or are we actually giving them access to the help that they need in order to overcome and manage their lives? We have to really take a look at whether or not this correction system is really working towards the end goal of corrections. And if it is not, then why do we continue to cycle people in and out of these systems? Why do we continue to allow certain things to be criminalized that are not criminal? And instead, why not focus on investing the billions of dollars that's invested in policing and into incarceration? Why not invest a portion of that into ensuring that people have access to housing, access to employment opportunities, and many of the things that drive people to committing crimes in the first place. So I think that the existence of all of these social economic issues are the reason that there's so many people who come into contact with the criminal legal system. And if we want to address that in any way, we first have to create a space for there to be opportunity for success, true rehabilitation, and truly devoting resources into people having the ability to succeed in life.
So, along with Scott, now I want to bring it over to you to talk with us as it pertains to incarceration, and as far as vulnerable populations, right? Looking at your work and listening to your beginning, and I want to going back to what you made mention of LGBTQ competency at reentry, and that also is just not even at reentry; it is also within the system at large, even at the point of contact, right? How police officers are handling our trans brothers and sisters, right? And that not being a part of the training mechanism. So as it pertains to incarceration, what are the most vulnerable populations?
So as far as most vulnerable populations, it also ties to the issue that you asked Mark, and the question you asked Mark about major issues with contact. I would say economic class is a risk factor. So one issue is poverty. LGBT people have higher rates of poverty, and that increases police contact. Marginalization is the driver of these increased rates, whether it's in employment discrimination, discrimination in school, family, incarceration rates. Another sort of vulnerable population would be homeless individuals. So LGBT people, they're more likely to be homeless, and that increases interactions with the criminal legal system. And I think, it's one of the more linear narratives in LGBT criminalization. A youth is kicked out of their house, then they're arrested for survival crimes, sex work, theft. Sleeping on the street is a crime all over Florida. So, it's hard to be homeless without breaking the law. It means a lot of homeless LGBT people are breaking the law to survive. On top of that, I would say in carceral facilities, transgender folks are the most vulnerable. They're not allowed to be who they are every step along the way. The sort of default policy throughout the United States for classification and housing for transgender individuals is misgendering them. They are put in situations where they can't be themselves. If they're a trans female who wants to wear makeup, that's often not allowed. Clothes, restricted. They are referred to with the wrong pronouns. They're not referred to by their preferred name very often. Again, this is generalizing. This is sort of default policy throughout the United States. And then they're also a target of violence. I know it's 4 in 10 trans individuals who are incarcerated are sexually abused. I mean, so, a judge sentences them to 5 years for wire fraud. And then that's at sort of like the chances a coin toss that they're going to be sexually abused. It's a sentence of 50% you will, 50% you won't be sexually abused. So it's really extraordinary vulnerability, but that extends throughout the entire LGBT population in terms of increased risks for physical violence, abuse. And then it's important to point out that abuse is both from jailers and other individuals who are incarcerated. I think that often gets lost. And then, on top of that, with transgender individuals, they're often put in solitary confinement. So you have much higher rates of solitary confinement, which is, a lot of people think, is just another form of torture. So it's a really brutal system that first marginalizes the most vulnerable and then brutalizes them in carceral facilities.
And I want to stick with you, Scott, and then go over to Mark. because you speak about the us understanding the disparities, and I want to kind of get your take on whether you think it's important for the public to understand the disparities and challenges that are uniquely affecting the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, I think awareness is critical. I don't think we're going to get pressure to change the law, policy, procedures, unless people are educated on these issues. If people are educated on these issues and they demand for better, I think politicians are going to be responsive for that. I think it's also important for, you know, all the senators in Tallahassee to know about these issues. So, you know, the next time they think about increasing penalties and they think about, you know, ramping up mass incarceration, they'll understand the consequences. I think it's important that jailers, probation officers, parole officers, just across the spectrum, we understand these issues and these issues as human issues. So, you know, we change policies like the misgendering of transgender individuals in their housing classification. You know, I think it's important we raise awareness because that's how we're going to push for better research, better data. Because right now, in terms of research and data, overwhelmingly, LGBT people don't really exist in the criminal legal sphere. There's a long history of this. It's complicated. There's a lot of factors that feed why we are where we are today. But both on the left and the right, there's been this erasure of LGBT people in the criminal legal space.
Thank you. Mark, same question for you as far as the importance for us to get the public to understand these various disparities. Scott speaks of awareness. Like my teacher used to say, what else do you have? You can't use the same word.
Yeah, I think awareness is extremely important, but also understanding that these people, right, are not necessarily criminal. They're people, and seeing the humanity of the folk who come into contact with the criminal legal system, and then understanding that the system is inherently violent. It's traumatizing, and so LGBTQ people who have contact with this system and come through this system are going to have much more severe experiences than others who are coming in. It's just kind of the nature of what happens in the system. But I think it is important for people to understand not only that these folk are human, right? These are our neighbors, our sisters, our brothers. And because of that, they are deserving of an opportunity and being seen beyond whatever the worst or bad decisions were that they may have made. Secondly, reminding yourself that there are so many things, right, that's criminalized. Who can truly say that they haven't broke the law, whether it was intentionally or not? And if you have, are you deserving of an opportunity to rebuild your life, or should you have to carry that stigma for the remainder of your life and be locked out of opportunities to access employment, housing, etc.? And it's expensive. It's extremely expensive to continue to operate the way that we are. It puts a strain on local, state, and federal budgets to continue to incarcerate people at such high rates. And if those resources were redistributed to our communities so that people could have access to medical care and access to all of the things that they need, again, to survive and thrive, then there would be less of a need for these penal systems, I believe. And we haven't tried it, right? We really should look at how we're viewing crime, but also how we view the solution. And so I think that it's important for people to understand that that incarceration and criminalizing someone really should be the last alternative, and really explore whether or not other avenues has been used to allow that person an opportunity to rebuild their lives without stigmatizing them forever. Because once people have these labels as someone who's just as involved or who's going through the criminal legal system, the repercussions of that in our state is eternal. We have someone now who's actually, I spent my day working with someone who came back to the community, and they identify as someone who's trans. We received some support from them a while ago from South Florida Mutual Aid Network, and through that they were able to secure employment. And now she's having a challenge with finding housing because of her criminal background, although she has a stable income. And just understanding that people are going to need, and the people need the ability to live and maintain themselves, and they need resources to survive. And if we don't afford people an opportunity to rebuild themselves, then we're contributing to crime in our communities. We're contributing by forcing people to make decisions based on survival. And I think that if we want to, again, address these systems, we just have to reconsider, how are we contributing? How are we complicit to all of the harm that's being caused?
Well, with that being said, because we have about 10 minutes left, and then we're going to open it up for questions. With that being said, how do you and Scott, and it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out statement. What does the ideal world look like when it comes to this work that you all doing? If you had a magic wand, right? How would this work look?
Well, if I can go, for me, I would say that when the police are called, right, or when 911 is called, unless it's truly a situation where there is a present danger, then the police aren't the ones to respond.
So you
Instead,
want to defund the police, Mark?
I'm sorry?
You want to defund the police?
Do I want to defund the police? I want to reinvest resources to folk in our community who are best equipped to respond to particular situations. Police shouldn't be the folk to respond to a call regarding homelessness, right? But we see that happen. Police shouldn't be the people to respond to someone in a mental health crisis, right? There should be folk who are actually trained to address this. And those people exist, and we can actually invest resources in ensuring that those folk are the first responders when necessary, so that we are not. It's unfair, first of all, for police to actually have to respond to folk who are in mental health crisis, to have to respond to folk who are to calls that are related to substance use or homelessness. That's not what they really signed up for, right? That should be something that's addressed through community and through social services, and ensuring that people are connected to what they need. People don't need punishment. They need resources, and they need ability to become regrounded. And if we focus on that, and so to get back to your question, the first response would be from the appropriate community provider. Secondly, we would explore opportunities for people to be diverted from the criminal legal system. Why house someone when it costs over $170 a day to hold them inside of a facility, when actually we can invest much less in resources in the community so that people can get back to work, and so that people, again, can stabilize themselves and care for themselves and their families. And so I think that diverting people to a program that allows for professional development, that allows for mental health treatment, that allows for addiction treatment, and so forth, is what should happen when people actually come into contact. Secondly, we have to stop holding folk for their inability to pay cash bond or cash bail. There's over 70% of people inside of institutions who have not yet been convicted of a crime. And if we really believe that people are innocent until proven guilty, we need to give those folk an opportunity to get back into the community before their lives unravel. when you're inside of those institutions, you lose your home, you lose your job. If you have children, you're not able to take care of them. Families fall apart. And so all of that happens because oftentimes that happens because someone isn't able to afford $500 or $1,000 of cash bail. What I'll say is if people are eligible for cash bail, then they're not truly a risk to the community, right?
Right.
Because the only thing that's separating them from their freedom is whether or not they're able to pay. And so I think that addressing that would be how this system looks, and trying again to exhaust all options before removing people from the community.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Mark. I mean, and the reason, and I'm coming to you, Scott. I gave you that curveball because so often we in these spaces, and people, when you speak about reimagining the area of the police, which I think I like, which is a much better word. People think you're trying to defund the police, and Mark, how you just kind of eloquently outlined that. I can send you over to some groups who need your messaging points that can help in the last election cycle.
I think that if I just add one thing, it's not defunding the police, right? It's participatory budgeting. We should determine where
absolutely. No, I agree. I agree
in a way that really serves our community.
That's right. That's right. 100%. Scott, if you had your magic wand, what the world you're trying to create, how would that look?
So the chat said best explanation I've heard about the defund the police question. So I'm gonna echo what Mark says. Yeah, magic wand. It's tough. Mark hit a lot of points. I know we want to move on to questions, but yeah, I would say incarceration rates really have to come down. Day to day, we're bailing out people for sleeping on the street, open container. I've bailed out old homeless ladies who are in their 70s who have spent 2 months in the Broward jail. I don't know why that's still happening. We're bringing people from confinement on a regular basis for seeking asylum in the United States. We, as I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of immigration work. Magic wand, I mean, I'd want to see parity in the criminal legal space, whether it's racial parity, gender parity, parity for LGBT individuals, low-income individuals. Mark highlighted a cash bond beautifully. There's no more stark example of inequality in the criminal legal system than this idea that you pay X dollars and you get out of jail. It shouldn't work that way. And then, Mark also touched on this, real attempts at rehabilitation. Departments of correction are called that. They're called, departments of correction and rehabilitation, but the culture within those institutions gave up a while ago on the correction and on the rehabilitation. So, that really needs to change.
I like it. Well, then talking about this change, Scott, sticking to you, what initiatives that are happening now to combat these effects? And I'm gonna ask a two-pronged question. So, what are the initiatives that are happening now that can combat the effects that you're speaking of? And what can donors and the public do?
Yeah, so I mean, there are more local initiatives like the organization that I run, Chainless Change, that Mark runs. Those are great initiatives to support because we're working hard in the community and doing a lot of good work that is filling a vacuum that isn't being addressed by the institutions that people would normally think of as addressing these things. Initiatives, I mean, there's lots of movements towards, maybe not in Florida that I'm aware of, reforming cash bail, abolishing cash bail, decarceration, projects to dramatically reduce incarceration, supporting those initiatives. You can go to their websites and make donations. I think those are direct things. when you vote, don't vote for someone who's favoring the policies of, Reagan and war on drugs. And there's still plenty of those individuals representing people in the state of Florida who are doing those things. So, when you go to vote, vote smart when you're talking about the criminal legal system. So, there are direct ways to make an impact. I will say that, the criminal legal system is a patchwork of a patchwork. Every municipality has their own laws. Every state has a different law. So it's going to be a million little steps that are going to transform the system. You can't use a magic wand and fix this. It's not like a federal issue where the executive has total control. It's going to take a lot of work by groups like mine, groups like Marq, groups like the ACLU, NAACP to fix this stuff.
Let me tell you something. As I go over to Marq, you're right. You all are doing the work. Marq, this man works tirelessly. Every time I text him, he's working on Chainless Change. And Scott, I know that you're doing the same because you both are so committed to the work. And so, Marq, I ask you the same question. What are the initiatives that are happening now to combat these effects, and what can donors and the public do?
Well, first starting with what the public can do, I think first addressing how you view people. Look at the lens in which you are seeing people who have been accused of a crime, and consider whether or not that is helpful or harmful. For example, we use a lot of phrases like felons and convicts and things of that sort, and using more person-centered language is a really small thing that people can do by simply identifying people as just as involved, and seeing the humanity goes a really long way, because again, people should not have to carry that label for their entire lives. Secondly, there are a lot of local and statewide initiatives that people can get involved with. But in order to do that, first understand things, work to understand the system that exists. There's been a push to ensure that people inside of institutions were able to receive gain time for participating in good programs. That's something that's received a lot of opposition in the past few years, but it's necessary to reduce the jail population and to also give people an opportunity to return to the community with skills, support those types of initiatives. There are local organizations who are doing this work. Our organization, if you want to get involved, there's tons of ways that you can. We have our camp program, which really does some organizing. There's a lot of stuff that happens in our own backyard that we should know about. Like, for example, inside of the local institutions here, people aren't being treated for COVID. People who do report having COVID are being punished. Trans people are extremely isolated on the 5th floor of the Broward Main Jail. When they are returning back to the communities, it's much more difficult to serve them because they haven't received medical care while inside of those facilities. Advocate for those folks. And if you want to do that, you can certainly reach out to us. We also have our Circle of Change, which is a pen pal program where people who are interested can communicate with someone inside of jail via pen pal while they're inside of jail. We facilitate the incoming and outgoing mail. So you never even have to give your own address. It all comes to us. If you want to get involved and to understand, you can certainly get to know someone and be a person that they can talk to, because folk are experiencing extreme isolation during this time because visitations are restricted at jails, especially during COVID. Speedy trial has been suspended, so folk are sitting in there, or have been sitting in since the beginning of COVID, without court dates. One of the easiest things that we can do with 5 or 10 minutes of our time is send a letter to someone inside of those institutions to let them know that they matter. Thirdly, you can use your resources. There are resources. You can make donations to our organization. We're small, we're growing, we're doing meaningful work, but we don't have enough resources. Chainlesschange.org is where you can find us. If you want to make a contribution to our organization, that would be helpful as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think at this time, we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions to these two awesome gentlemen who have a wealth of knowledge, who I can sit here and ask questions with all day. Let's open it up for questions. If you have a question, why don't you just go ahead and raise your hand and so I can acknowledge. Go ahead, George. I see you.
I'd share one quick observation. Everything that Scott and Mark said rings so true from everything I've learned in trying to work with the community in terms of the filmmaking. I think the other thing that people need to understand, it's poverty and all those things, but the discrimination, it is so abusive when it comes to transgender people that I think I'll just give one a quick example at the risk of people who have seen the film boring them. Hopefully I won't, but Ashley Diamond is a transgender woman who survived literally from hand to mouth until she was in her early 30s, and she was dating a man who stole a miter saw. He asked her to pawn it. She was arrested for pawning this miter saw. For people that know, a miter saw, probably the most expensive power miter saw, is $400 or $500. In the United States, the average sentence for all forms of murder is 6 years. She was sentenced for pawning a stolen miter saw to 12 years in state penitentiary. When she was released early because of endless abuse and rapes, she was put paroled right back into the same small community where she couldn't get work. She was abused by local press, even Walmart's hired her, and then they realized who she was and they paid her out of the cash register so there would be no record that she would be, that she was hired. And then she got pulled over continuously by the police for broken mirror, broken taillight, and she missed a court appointment for a broken mirror, side mirror, and 6 police officers went out, tackled her about a year and a half ago to the ground, beat her, knocked out some of her teeth, and she's been back in prison for parole violation ever since. I could tell you lots of stories, but I think the point that people need to understand is these people often start with a bad break to begin with, but the discrimination within the justice system is so appalling that we really do need to do something to help these fellow human beings.
Thank you so much, George, for making that statement. Scott? You're on mute, Scott.
Hi, everybody. I think this is an incredible panel tonight. Thank you, Chev. I am the chairman of Our Fund Foundation. And as David started with a little plea, and after watching this tonight, I'm going to commit to both of you, that I'm going to make a contribution to both of you. I do have a question for you, and I wish I knew the answer, but I'm going to ask it. With lots of these homeless youths, rather than being homeless, is there some place, does Miami and Broward, do they have places where these young people can go to so they're not homeless? Are there shelters and the like for young people who are gay?
Either Scott or Mark?
I am not aware of many housing facilities that are specifically for LGBTQ youth. I have been talking through something like that with South Florida, with LJ from South Florida Mutual Aid. And I know that that organization, along with a partner that they're working with, tends to place folk in temporary housing and provide some housing support for people experiencing homelessness, especially LGBTQ folk. But I will say that I'm not aware, other than, Broward House and some of the really common names in our community, of spaces that are specifically for LGBT youth. I don't, they don't exist as far as I know. Scott, you may have.
I'm not for LGBT specific youth. I'm not aware of any.
Hi, it's George. Let me just mention, our fund looked at this a number of years ago. You have to remember, if they're 18 or younger, they go into foster care. So you're really talking 18 to 24 years old. And when our fund looked into this, there are no facilities with accommodations specifically for LGBT. There are places like Covenant House, but the problem with Covenant House is they put them right back in with kids who abused, same kind of kids that abused them as youth when they ran away from home. So there's really not much here in South Florida.
Yeah, and I'll say I'm one of those people who aged out of that system, the foster care system, and experienced homelessness. And there weren't a lot of resources available for me at that time, I think, and I don't think much has changed in years later.
Wow. Look like some appropriation I need to file for next year. We find the place where it can go. Thank you, David, for this idea, for this space, for the idea. No, I'm serious, because we come into these places, and what you don't know, you can't do. And so I appreciate coming to these spaces and even hearing that, because now that gives me a direction to go in from a legislative aspect to ask for funding for next year, for next session. Thank you all. Any more questions? Man, well, listen, this was really good, and I'm serious. I was about to say welcome to the Shevrin Show. Thank you for attending, but but I'm serious. On a serious note, just to have the opportunity to hear you, Scott, and to hear you, Mark, and to speak so passionately about the work that you all are doing, it's very refreshing to hear, to see, and to know. And I'm just seeing that, like Scott just made a donation and a generous contribution to you all, and I'm sure others will also. And I just want to I'm going to contribute to both of you, and because of this, just listening to both of you in this space. And so please just continue doing the work that you all are doing. And to all of you who are here, I just want to thank you all for allowing me into this space to be able to do this. David, again, I can't say it enough. I appreciate you and the work that you all are doing. I know session starts on Tuesday, and before I even go anywhere and log off, I want to tell you all to send your positive energy. It's going to be a huge fight this year in Tallahassee, but it's a fight worth having for people like Scott and Mark and the work that they're fighting for, and the people like all of you here who support this type of work. So thank you all for having me, and I turn it back over to Obed and David.
Wow, that was incredible. Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and especially thank Scott and Mark for their expertise and being on our panel and giving their time. And I definitely want to thank Senator Jones for helping moderate and doing such a great job and keeping us on time. I know you're busy, so we don't want to hold up too much, but yeah,
I'm a church boy, so I like to follow the schedule.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know what that's like. Yeah. But yeah, no, I want to just thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And wow, just great information, and I just really appreciate everyone taking the time. This is a subject that can be somewhat difficult to talk about, but I'm really glad that everyone showed up and is here. Just thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you all for having us. Have a great one.
Thank you. Have a good night.